So a while back, I was doing a little bit of political philosophy, and I'd like to do that again. I was having a conversation with my father today about um, government programs, socialist types programs, and generally, I take just sort of a principled opposition to them. But this is a discussion that my father and I have been having for the past 4 years, essentially, on and off. And now that I'm living at home, we have ample time to just go at it. A while back, I was having a conversation with Stargazer, who's an anarchist here on YouTube, and it was a conversation that basically started in response to another anarchist named Luke 2000, 9000, something like that. I forget the number. Who basically made the argument that libertarians, such as myself, are really just anarchists when you follow their philosophy through completely. And I had made the joke that that's kind of like calling a bisexual gay, just because he can't, he's really gay and he can't deal with the fact that he's totally gay, or whatever like that. It was very tongue-in-cheek, and it sparked quite some controversy, and the controversy was more detailed than just that joke, of course. But something I think worth mentioning, or the kind of the revelation that was had in this conversation I had today with my dad, is the situation in which government programs are really quite proper. And in the past, what I've done is stand for arguments, and I think we all do this, but I've stood for arguments that I didn't quite understand as thoroughly as I ought to, but left it in the benefit of the doubt of the people who I respect, people who I think are intelligent or whatever, and think that, well, obviously they thought it through. They must be right. Certainly, if your radar's going or your red flags are waving, yeah, you're right. You're right. This is an error that I have, and I think a lot of people have, and it was rooted out today. And basically, here's the situation we were talking about. I caught it on actually a Penn and Teller's Bullshit episode, where there was this paraplegic woman that had no legs who was staying with a relative, and it was real hard on the relative because of all the special equipment that she needed to get in and out of her wheelchair, into bed and into the tub and all this sort of thing. So she bought a lot of land to build her own house on, and just before they were about to break ground, they discovered that there was some sort of endangered bird nesting there in the little bit of woods that were on the property. And she's not able to build there. That the government has told them that it's an endangered bird. That's the end of it. You can't build on it. And she can't sell the piece of property, of course, because now the word is out that there's this endangered bird on there and you can't develop it. So who would buy a lot of land? And even if they did, it would be for much less than what she had paid for it. And my argument was to try to articulate the injustice that was happening there in as an objective sense, or in as an objective sense as I could possibly do. We could all look at that on the surface level and say, yeah, that doesn't feel quite right. There's something wrong with it. But in argumentation, it's a little bit like looking at a piece of art. I have a friend that paints, does watercolors and oils of horses, and she's studied horse anatomy for 14 years. And we were at an art show just yesterday. This is related, I promise. And we were looking at this horse painting, and there was something just off about it. And it was her that was able to go in and say, well, the nostrils are a little out of proportion, or they're a little too far forward. It looks like they're wrapping around in front when they should have been more on the side. The ears are way too big. This bone and that bone is out of place. And she could go in and tell you which muscles should have been showing and which parts and so on. Really quite impressive. So when we look at those kinds of situations, we might not completely understand, but we have that feeling that something's not quite right, such as the case with the paraplegic woman. It might, in fact, be evidence for an actual objective reason as to why it's wrong, instead of just the feeling. So that was the goal today, is to demonstrate why that was wrong. And basically I've come to is not only a demonstration of why it's wrong, but also a demonstration for how it could be right. You see, the woman is in possession of a piece of property that she had earned and she had purchased with the intention of building on it. A law then tells her that she can't build on it, and that's the end of it. The difficulty is kind of having your cake and eat it too, is that the law that's in place is there to protect an endangered species. But it's doing so at some people's, at the compensation of other people without actually compensating them. Compromising, I should say. It's compromising people without compensating them. And the way that you could make this just, very simply, is say that the government would then be responsible for covering the difference of the resale value if she wanted to sell it to someone else who knew that you can't develop on it. And here's basically what it boils down to, is whenever you want a social program, or say just keep it very simple, like protecting species, there's nothing, contrary to what I had believed before, there's nothing in principle wrong with having government establish laws to protect a particular animal. Or the spotted owl is a big thing here in Wyoming, and the forestry and whatever else. And that's all good and fine. The problem is when the government is then not willing to compensate for losses accordingly. Here in Wyoming, it's interesting because there's a bunch of different thoughts, and you guys can roll with any of these that you want in the comments. The Supreme Court ruled at some point, finding that wilderness animals are owned by everyone in the state, wherever the state happens to be, and wherever the animals happen to pass through. That being said, if a wild animal does damage to your property, it's not the government's fault. And that's how they found and they ruled. And Wyoming is one state that overturned that, saying that, well, if we own the animals, then it's up to the government to compensate for losses. And that's precisely what they do. And I'm sure it wasn't a big, deep, cerebral kind of thing where they sat down and they contemplated philosophy. It's just that the ranch lobby here in Wyoming is very significant. I'm sure that's what got it through. But in the end, it works out, as far as I can tell anyway, and you can offer your comment on this, is that if we are, say, the wolf is protected, and you know, the left side likes to protect the animals because they're either gorgeous creatures or whatever the case may be. Striking the balance then would be like, well, here are these individuals who are producing beef, which is a thing that's in demand, and can't do that if there are losses because of the wolves that are being protected by law. The way this government, anyway, in Wyoming compensates for it is that they just pay for the losses. They protect the wolf and pay for the losses that the wolf causes. And in that situation, it evens itself out. It's balanced. It's saying we're restraining you here, but if that compensates you in any way, or rather compromises, if that compromises you in any way, we'll compensate you equally for that. Had that policy been done with this paraplegic woman, she wouldn't be in the bind that she is in now, because the government's just saying, no, you can't build on it, and I'm not going to do anything about it. It's your problem, you see. And that's the injustice.